Line unmuted.
Okay, welcome everybody to today's webinar. It's Megan Thorpe here from Momentum, and today's webinar will be on managing fixed assets in MYOB Advanced. So we're going to be recording this meeting. Fingers crossed the recording goes well today. Just going to share my screen now. So Glenda will be taking today's webinar, and just a reminder that there is a chat box at the top if you have any questions. We will stop for a few questions as we go along. I'm going to make Glenda the presenter. Okay, over to you, Glenda.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our fixed assets presentation today. And I'm just having a look here. Probably got the wrong screen. Okay. So just a quick inquiry for everyone. We are going to go through the fixed assets process. So not everybody uses fixed assets within MYOB. However, it's a very simple application once it's all configured. There are some primary configurations that need to happen within the general ledger and as well as within the fixed assets module. So what I'd like to do first off is take you through some of the basics configurations that we need to set up in GL to ensure that the functionality processing happens correctly. When we're setting up the chart of accounts, we need to be able to have all of our depreciation accounts as well as our asset accounts and our expenditure accounts. So in this screenshot here, we have all the fixed asset accounts, so land and building, plant and equipment, operating, etc. Our accumulated depreciation accounts. Down at the bottom here, we have a fixed asset accrual account. I'll come back to that shortly. And on the next page, we also have our depreciation expense accounts so that we can actually process everything to go to specific depreciation expense accounts, or alternately, you can have one single depreciation expense account depending on your business structure. Looking at the fixed asset accrual account, that's the fixed asset accrual account's used to process all of your purchases that you wish to make into assets into this account. That then facilitates the fixed asset process to creating the new assets. So when you're buying products, you can actually process them to this GL account instead of just straight to the asset account itself. The processing of converting a purchase to an asset then does the actual GL journal movements. So to cover off other parts of the system that we use within fixed assets, and that is to do with our organisational structure. Within our organisational structure, we have departments. So fixed assets can actually be allocated to different departments so that you can actually go and tag the assets with a number or sort of categorise it. We can also use sub-accounts for those that are using sub-accounts to actually classify the expenditure going to the correct sub-account. So within this particular section, I've set up the customer service department with an expense sub-account for customer service default and the finance one for finance default, so that when any purchases are made, they can be actually allocated to the correct divisions or departments. The next part of the system, so that's primarily the general ledger side of things that you need to worry about. The only other area is within the finance setup. Within our general ledger, our finance, not configuration, under finance, our financial periods. You'll notice in here that there is a FA period to be closed, and that forms part of your month-end reconciliation process where you actually close the fixed asset period. same as you would close an AP period, an AR period, inventory, GL, cash book. You also do a close on the fixed assets. Going forward from that, if we start looking now at the actual configuration of fixed assets and how the system's already is configured to set our preferences. So in our setup area, our configuration, we have fixed asset preferences. And the fixed asset preferences show some defaults in the system. So in this case, we have our fixed asset accrual account here, which indicates the GL account that we want to use for our accrual purpose. This is a default account, and I'll explain a little bit further later on what that means. So from that point, we can also allocate a default proceeds account. However, you can set up different proceeds or disposal accounts separately. These are not mandatory on this field. However, anything with an asterisk is a mandatory field. Going through to our numbering sequences, we have our default sequences set up for our fixed assets register, a fixed asset numbering series, and then the GL batch processing. Looking at the other areas of the system, the depreciation history, it's going to look at depreciation history based on the book, the depreciation book. So the depreciation book represents whether it's a financial book or a tax book for Australian purposes. Require full reconciliation before disposal is also another mandatory thing, so that you can reconcile the asset before disposing it, making sure everything has been posted, including any depreciation. On the posting sides here, we can automatically release acquisition transactions, automatically release depreciation transactions. I've unticked that for a process to show you actually what happens manually within the system so that you can trace the processing. Generally, that would be ticked on to automatically post the depreciation to the general ledger when you process depreciation. Down further the screen, all the automatic processes are set to automatic to happen. The update to GL is turned on for all at this point because we are starting from a scratch. So the only time you turn the update to GL off, and this is the only application within the system that allows you to add in opening balances without linking it to the general ledger. We do that when we're bringing on history assets. We turn that off so that we can actually bring assets on that have an accumulated depreciation at this point so that we can start depreciating from the next financial period. Automatically post on release relates to the general ledger posting. I've turned that off at this point so that you can see we can trace through the GL posting to the general ledger once we've done some transactions. Post by summary to GL, what that does is summarise all the transactions into one entry per GL account. So you wouldn't see the individual depreciations for the assets in the general ledger. Normally we turn this off because we want to be able to look at our general ledger and for our accountants to look at the general ledger and go, yes, that asset's been depreciated and the posting's in the GL, and therefore I can reconcile it. This is a normal thing that we would do within Australia. Very rarely do we do summary postings to the general ledger. So from that point, I'd like to take you into the disposal methods. So looking at the setup list, if we go to the disposal methods, I've set up two disposal methods here. One is a sold of an asset and the other one is a write-off of an asset. You don't need to have two, but you can have different ones, probably because you might have different GL accounts where the proceeds go to. The next phase of the setup is to create the book, the fixed asset books. Excuse me. So the fixed asset books represent how the tax is going to be calculated and how it's going to post to the GL. Within this section, I have set up two books. One is the financial posting book, which is updated to the general ledger, and it is set to fixed per day with processing at a mid-period. So we process it, say, on the 15th of the month, and we set the calendar up to start from a particular period. The second book is our tax book, which we do not post to the GL, but we generate for tax purposes. These two books can be one in the same, or they can be separate. That is all depends on how your business rules go and your tax rules go. If your tax rules and your business rules are the same, then you really only need one book in the system. This information would be best sourced from your accountants who manage your tax books to say whether or not you need to run it with two separate books so that your financial details are different. Looking at this, the financial book, when I click on here in the header, there's a field called calendar. When I click on the calendar, it takes me to the general ledger, so general ledger financial year calendar setup, so that it knows that my first financial year in my general ledger starts at 2013. That's the periods where the assets will actually begin to start from. At the end of the discussions, I'll explain to you a little bit further about creating prior period years to manage assets you are taking on that might be earlier than this period. If you need any, if we have time, I'll discuss that further. It is something that we have encountered quite a few times when managing our assets, that we have to actually shift the year prior to this financial year to enable the assets to be brought on into the system. If I go back here now to the financial book, you can see here, that's where it tells me my first financial calendar year is 2013. For my tax book, I've set my tax calendar only to start from this financial year because this is where I want to begin the transactions from. If I click on the calendar for this one, it then takes me into the fixed asset book calendar, which is not a GL posting calendar. It is purely to manage the tax book based on a calendar period for your financial reporting, you're reporting to your accountant for tax purposes. To generate the periods based for these calendars, there's a process that we run through in fixed assets to generate the calendar periods. And underneath my process button, I click on here and I click on the recurrent generate FA calendars. So in the initial stages, we set up the tax calendars to generate according to however long the depreciation of your assets go to. In this case, I've taken it out to 2060. Each year, you'll probably need to monitor this and be able to generate your calendars going forward. So you might buy another block of land next year, which means that land, although it doesn't depreciate, still needs to go through to a future year. If I want to generate through to 2070, I simply click on the system here, generate 2070, and I can click on here to generate my financial calendar through to 2070. So if I go process, my financial and my tax can both generate through to those periods. Once I go back here now to my book, you'll see that my calendars have generated through to the last financial year. So the last financial year doesn't necessarily mean that the GL book has been created for that year. However, when you get to that, if it's not generated, you won't be able to process your depreciation. So they're the things that we need to be aware of in the system. From that point, I want to talk more about the fixed asset types and the fixed asset classes. Before I do that, I just want to explain the depreciation methods that are configured in the system. There are default depreciation methods that are set up in the system. For instance, we have a default straight line method already predefined, which is your straight line method of depreciation according to the accounting rules. We also have a multitude of other depreciation methods in the system. For instance, we have double declining method, which is your diminishing value method. The terminologies are a little bit different based on terminology because it's US terminology, but if I have a look here at declining value for 150, you'll see here it's got a double declining method of 150 units. So these methods are all predefined. In Australia, we use basically two types of methods. One is a diminishing value method and the other is a straight line method. Once we get to that point, we actually talk through how do we configure those up based on the Australian tax rules. And we configure those up in the system at this point. They then become what we call a custom depreciation method. I haven't done that for this exercise. It's something that we would talk about when we're doing an implementation. Going through the fixed asset types, we have some predefined fixed asset types set in the system. However, you can add as many as you like. So when we set up a fixed asset type, it's in the system, we can tell whether it's a tangible asset and it is depreciated, or it's a tangible asset and not depreciated, or it's not a tangible asset. So these system configurations all set in the fixed asset types. The link between the fixed asset type and the asset class comes in this configuration. So I've set up 3 or 4 different depreciation types here, asset classes, sorry. So if I have a look at my land is set up with a depreciation of land. It's set as a tax, pick it up here with my asset type of land. There's no useful life on this one. It is a tangible asset. The only other thing that I need to make sure on the land one is that I set my general ledger accounts accordingly. So your GL accounts that are mandatory to set up on here are your asset account, your accumulated depreciation accounts, and your gains and losses accounts. When setting them up, if you have fixed asset sub-accounts or you have sub-accounts set up in the system, you can default the sub-accounts based on a combination effect. This combination effect basically is representative of whether or not the asset is, you're going to pick the sub-account up from the asset or from where I've got D's down here. This is coming from the department. So this is going to come from the asset class and this is going to come from the department. Going forward from that, if I select the next asset class like software, for instance, my software is depreciable. I've set it to 3 years depreciation. I've then set up my depreciation settings so that my fixed asset is set to here. This is my GL. The useful life is 3 years. I'm setting it to straight line method with a full period of depreciation, and I'm setting it's pulling through so that it's going to process from the 15th day of the month. On the tax one, I've set a different method up to print in a quarterly period, so for the 3 years. So I might run it every quarter for my tax books. Similarly for the computers, we have general settings set up here where it's a tangible asset. Yes, it's depreciated and it's a 5-year life. Again, the settings set to straight line method with a double declining to straight line method for full periods. So the looking into these different types of class methods, which is your depreciation methods, if you wanted to have a look further into those, they are all explained in the help screens of the system. So from that point there, we've got our assets set up, we've got our classes and our types. The next thing we need to do is buy some assets. So from that point, I go to my purchasing side of things. I go to accounts payable, and I can create asset invoices for my assets in the system. So I bought some antivirus, I bought some office software, and I want to release that because all of the expenditure on these assets goes to my fixed asset clearing account. To GL account to my fixed asset clearing account. So once I release these transactions, they then posted into the system. I'll just release both of these. And we can see from the general ledger, we explore the GL account, fixed asset accrual account, you can see here that we've actually got some assets that we've put into the system. I did say these have been set previously so that the journals are sitting there waiting to be processed to the actual asset account. If I have a look here under my release, general ledger, release transactions, post-transactions. Post-transactions, these are all the asset accounts, the purchases that I made earlier that I'm wanting to release. So I can actually release these processes because they've come from the fixed asset module. I'll just post those. So that then when I look at my GL account summary, and my account class fixed assets, you can see here my purchases for my fixed assets have now been associated to the GL. So moving from that point through, I still have in my accrual account accrual account, I still have a balance in here for those last two assets that I've purchased. Those being the last two assets here. So moving on from there to my fixed assets. Megan, do you have any questions at this point?
Not at this stage, Glenda. If anybody does have any questions, just feel free to send them through the chat box to myself, which will be Momentum Software Solutions.
Okay, so moving on from there to the fixed asset module, how do we actually bring on assets? How do we purchase assets? From the process section of the assets, we've actually done the purchasing in AP. It's sitting in our fixed asset clearing account. So we go to our fixed asset module here and into our process area, and we want to do asset management, and we want to convert purchases to an asset. Because our GL account is set on our preferences for our default purchases account, you can see here that I've got, it's automatically defaulted through, and it is showing me I've got 3 assets in here that I wish to add to my system. These will automatically come up within the system. So processing from this point, I simply click on my asset. So here I want to select my asset class. So in this particular case, this is software. And how do I know that? Because I've got it over here in my description. To make life a little bit easier to select this information, I can actually change my column layout so that my transaction description appears in an easier manner to view. So I can actually put it up here. I might move it down a little bit further past there. Okay, so that's for software. To create the asset or select the department as well, so this particular software is going to belong to my customer service department. There's an antivirus software for my computers, and I need it to be registered in that manner. I can click on the action button here on the side, so here in the click on here, and it automatically creates down the bottom. The system will automatically, at this point, generate the total individual number of assets that you wish to buy. Okay, so it's selecting them to create all the assets in one. You don't necessarily have to do it that way. You can actually modify this then to say, no, I only want one asset with a total quantity of 5. So in that case, you can modify this to go 5 assets and add your total price here of 2401.53 and then remove the additional lines. Refresh. That's the only thing that's a little bit tricky is because that created 5 lines on a split screen, I had to actually refresh to bring the additional line in to remove. Finalize this to create the asset. Because I have automatic asset IDs configured, all I need to do from here is click on Process. And that will generate my asset for me, so that when I refresh my screen here, I now only have 2 assets to create. I can go to my asset register. So looking here under the work area, manage my assets. I can go to the last asset, and there's my assets that I've created for my antivirus software, 5 years at today's date, and that's my amount. Just looking through this screen for the assets, it's pulled through all of the information, so the software, property, there's my branch and my department, whether it's what my purchase information is. You can actually add all this information into the system, what GL accounts it's going to post to, and my balance, including my depreciation books and methods. So then I can go back and I can convert more purchases to an asset. So I can select, again, the office software. I want to set that to, again, software, my department is customer service. And as I update the information on the top of the screen, you'll see at the bottom of the screen is populating the information. Again, I only want to have the 5 licenses under one asset. So I can then adjust my amount and remove the additional lines. And you'll notice at the top of the screen the selected amount is still showing an amount that's not correct because I still have 1 line left to remove. So that's the process that you go through, and the system does reconcile the information. So now I'm back to where I started. I have my 5 licenses and my total amount correct. I can now process to generate my asset. Refresh of the screen, and I only have oh, I've got a rounding amount left on there. Talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so that's probably possible because I typed in an incorrect amount and I said the selected quantity. So I'm going to select this last one, the computer desktop. And that's going to go under computers. But these desktops are actually going to be for my finance department. So I'm going to select that, and I want to allow it to create the individual assets. So I'm going to have 3 individual assets here for purchasing. So once I click on process for that asset, that's all completed, but I still have that rounding sitting in my system here, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Then when I look at my asset register, I can actually see here I now have a list of assets in the system. So my antivirus and my software here, and my 3 desktops that I purchased. Excuse me. So the next step from that point is basically everything reconciles to there. I've processed my assets. If I go back to my general ledger, in here, I can go back to my GL and check my balances. So I've actually got transactions in here for my assets again to release. Okay. So come out, go back here, general ledger. Oh, there's nothing there. Okay, why is there nothing there? I go to fixed assets and I go in here and I want to release fixed asset transactions because I didn't actually release it. So I wanted to put in here from my purchasing, my purchase assets. Hang on. Depreciation, they should all be there. Refresh my screen. General ledger. Post-transaction. Post-transaction. And there's my fixed asset to post. So they've now been posted. If I look at my GL account in here, on my FA clearing account, you can see there's my 1 cent remaining that I have not applied to my assets. So going forward from that, I've decided I'm going to worry about that and I will actually write that off the assets. From the fixed asset point of view, the next step in the process would be to do my depreciation. So there's two ways you can actually check your depreciation in the system. We can run what's called a calculate-only method of depreciation. So in here, for my financial period of October, I want to calculate depreciation for all the assets that are only in my financial book. So all of these assets based on my financials, I want to calculate my depreciation for. So I can click on here, select all, and process. This is purely a calculation. It is not actually generating the depreciation. So from that point, I can then click here on my assets and check my depreciation history. My depreciation history will show me the calculated value for my asset for that individual period. I come back here and I know I'm happy with what's been calculated. I can then turn around and go, okay, I can depreciate my assets now. Remember earlier on I said in my preferences that I turned off the posting to the fixed assets so I could show you the actual release mechanism with your fixed assets. So if I go here and I want to process all, I can select all and click process or click the process all button to generate my depreciate. Okay, again, I can click on my asset here and my depreciation history to see that yes, it's actually calculated, but it hasn't posted. There's nothing there because I haven't actually released the process. To do that, I can actually go here to release fixed asset depreciation, and I can actually view the fixed asset journal within the fixed asset module that is calculating the depreciation. So you can actually see what the amounts are that are going to be depreciated against which particular assets. If you find within this journal that you're not happy with the way it's calculated and you need to make some changes, you can actually delete the unreleased transaction. So I can go here and I can go, yes, I want to delete that, and I can delete the actual transaction because it hasn't been posted. So now, if I go back here, I have no transactions to release. If you turn on the automatic release within the preferences, here, this automatic release for the preferences, you don't have that ability to reverse an unreleased transaction. The preference is yours. In the early stages of processing, I would recommend for users to actually check everything before it posts to the GL to make sure you're happy. Once you are confident with the processes, then turn it on to automatically post. So I'm going to go back here again, and I'm going to do the process again to calculate. So I actually want to select my period again for October. I'm going to depreciate, and I'm going to select my financial book, select all, and process. This time, when I go to my release FA transactions, I'm actually going to release it because I'm happy. Everything is processed correctly. So I've released my fixed asset transactions. So now when I go to my assets, I can actually go and see the depreciation history, what was calculated, and what's been processed. From that point there, within the general ledger, I can actually go to my post transactions, and my fixed asset depreciation register is sitting there to be processed. So I can actually click on this one and go post, and that's my depreciation journal posted. So now when I look at my GL account or my account summary, if I go to fixed assets. I'll take that. I just scroll through. You can see here now I have actually got an accumulated depreciation in my assets. Fixed assets. And depreciation. So you can see there are all of the assets are depreciated. My accrual account's clear. My computers have been depreciated accordingly. And then on the alternate side, my expenses expense, there's my depreciation expense. In this particular case, my software and my equipment are posting to the same account. So from the fixed asset point of view, that's the basic process that you would go through. There are some other things that you would probably want to be able to do with your assets. For instance, you might want to split an asset. So if we have a look at the actual asset itself, say for instance we look at the computer equipment, the office licenses. So these licenses are set up as a quantity of 5 on here. That's the original amount. And we have the balances on here, so we show a balance. You've already depreciated some of it, and then you decide, oh, I want to split the asset. I can actually click on Actions here and split. So it's telling me I want to split this asset. I can depreciate before I split, but I actually say it's telling me what period I want to depreciate, want to split it on, and no, I don't want to split it on this level. So I can simply then say, okay, the quantity I want to split out is 1, the ratio is 20, 1, 1, 1. But I also need to put a cost. I also need to identify what cost it's going to split by. Okay, so in this particular case, for the asset, I want to split it out at what was the value? $400? $400. No, it must be 0. So it's going to split the asset out. So if I click on split, it's creating all the individual assets. There's nothing there to split, so everything has been converted. Manage my assets. It's now created the additional assets. So there's a quantity of 1. I don't have an original cost in my balance. It's not showing me any value, so I can update that. So I can update my original cost here, purchases, and the balance. So then on my original asset, one. Antivirus. Let's update my original cost here. Save. That's my original cost, but I would actually have to do a reconciliation process to bring the values across correctly. So my acquisition cost here, so I would have to adjust it. I'm not going to go through that process at this point. Just be aware that you can actually do that and split the assets down. You can dispose of your assets. So the process is through here. You can transfer assets from one department to another, one class to another, and you can dispose of your assets. And this automatically creates the journal entries and information. At the end of each period, you wish to close your financial period so that you're not actually transacting any further financials in that period. You can actually click on your period here and close. I'm not going to do that because I'm in my demo data and I probably want to use this again for different information. At that point, there's not a lot more I can tell you about fixed assets that you guys don't already know. Processing, reconciling back to your general ledger. There are some reports in the system where you can balance to your GLs. So you print your reconciliation balance report. You can print in a detailed format. It shows you the assets, the GL accounts that are in there, and reconciling to your GL accounts and sub-accounts. You also have the FA balance report, which simply gives you the list of assets for a different department or each individual department and what their values and current values are. Asset list just shows you purely a list of assets in the system. It doesn't show you any costs, so you can actually show where these assets are. Probably more so use this report for doing checks on where the assets actually exist, so that you can say, okay, in this department, I've got these assets. In this department, in finance, I've got these assets, and you can print the reports out and have them distributed and verified for your audit. There are different reports here for your audit reports for additions monthly, transfers, splits, depreciation, transactions, quite a lot of reports in here for reconciliation purposes. At that point, I don't have very much more. I wish to thank you all. If there are any questions, please, Megan, if you've got any queries.
No questions on my end. If anybody has any, I'll unmute everybody now. So if you want to speak or send it through the chat box, let us know now before we finish the webinar. I will be checking the recording of this today, so if all goes well, I'll be setting out the recording of this this week. So fingers crossed all is good. Anyone have any more questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you very much, Glenda.
Okay. If anybody does have questions and they want to send through an email to myself, that's quite okay. I'll address what I can as far as the information is concerned. So thank you all very much for attending.